Political consultant and radio talk show host Dick Morris joins us from the city of brotherly love, where he hosts the afternoon show for WPHT. Dick, it's always good to have you here. And some years ago, you wrote a book about Bill Clinton entitled Because He Could. Is that same type of thinking, albeit in a very different context, prompting President Obama to move forward with this executive action?
I think it's the opposite, JD. I think it's because he couldn't. He couldn't get it through Congress, and he can't do it legally. I think this is going to be reversed by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has allowed regs for cars under the Clean Air Act, but has not ruled on stationary pollution sources like smokestacks, and I don't think it's going to affirm that. I think it'll affirm it as to health, but not as to carbon dioxide. But look, the basic point here is that Obama is now seizing control of another 17% of the American economy. Federal government spending is 35%, federal, state, and local. Then healthcare is another 17. Manufacturing is 10, electric power generation and energy is 7. So he's now trying to control that entire range. And that basically defines socialism. And don't think for a minute that global warming or health is what's motivating this. It's very simply a power grab by trying to regulate power plants.
Well, Dick, a lot of people were surprised by the timing of this announcement because it came before the tough election year, midterm election year, specifically in key state like Kentucky here. Alison Lundgren Grimes could not be happy about this announcement, the Democratic challenger to Mitch McConnell. But was this the greatest gift Mitch McConnell's received this election year so far?
Yeah, I think it virtually guarantees McConnell's victory, and if there was any question, Caputo's victory in the J. Rockefeller seat in West Virginia. But it's more significant than that. I'm here in Pennsylvania, for example, and 40% of Pennsylvania's energy comes from coal. Nationally, it's about the high 40s, actually, that comes from coal. It's been dropping, but it still is over 40. Anybody that depends upon coal for their electric power is going to see the utility bills skyrocket. Utility rates used to be a huge issue in politics. They're not much anymore because the price of natural gas has been dropping and holding everything down. But with these new regulations, you're just going to see an explosion in those costs. And the effect will be horrible for manufacturing. The only reason American manufacturing has managed to survive is automation. And machines run on electricity. You make the electricity more expensive, and the cheap labor becomes more attractive in other countries. And it won't just be limited to manufacturing. These regs will also affect hospitals and schools. You'll have to take more of the education budget and use it to pay for cleaner electricity. And I can't stress enough that none of these regulations relate to health. They all relate to climate change. The particulate emissions are already very well scrubbed out of coal. You can always get a little cleaner, but it's been very, very clean. A huge success. This is all about the fanciful fear of global warming.
Dick, you mentioned the fact that it will have an impact in a major state like Pennsylvania, given the amount of coal utilized there in the power quotient. But let's return to Kentucky briefly. Mitch McConnell, as John mentioned, this is a gift that keeps on giving for him in his race with Alison Lundgren Grimes. Here's what Senator McConnell had to say, quoting now, "By imposing these draconian new rules on the nation's coal industry, President Obama and every other liberal lawmaker in Washington who quietly supports them is also picking regional favorites, helping their political supporters in states like California and New York, while inflicting acute pain on states like Kentucky." Sounds like Mitch is playing to the home folks pretty effectively there.
He is, and you got to bear in mind when you talk about coal, that the coal industry has developed and is developing a technology for taking the carbon dioxide and the other pollutants that come out of the smokestack, capturing them, and then burying them underground so that nobody ever has to breathe them. The problem is that it's now too expensive to deploy, and they've asked the EPA for another year to refine this technology to a point where it can become commercially applicable. And they know that their whole industry's future depends on it, But EPA won't give them the time. They won't give them the year, even though these standards are supposed to take effect by 2030. They won't give them the extra year to develop this coal recapture technology, which is what they call it. They're in such a mad rush to finish this before Obama leaves office because they know they could never pass it through Congress, and they couldn't even pass it when they had 60 votes. And they know that no other president will issue so sweeping an executive order.
Dick, we began this interview mentioning your book about President Clinton entitled Because He Could. There's another book out from another Clinton, specifically Hillary's new book, Hard Choices. And her chapter on Benghazi was obtained by Politico. The former senator, former first lady, former secretary of state's tone defiant. Here's what she had to say about the attack, quoting now, "Those who exploit this tragedy over and over as a political tool minimize the sacrifice of those who served our country." Dick, how is she playing this, and will it work?
Well, the American people, there was just a poll out, a Wall Street Journal NBC poll that showed 58% think that Obama is covering up aspects of this. And by 20 points, they want this investigation renewed. The burden of what Hillary is saying is that Susan Rice used the CIA talking points. And that is incorrect, as we discussed on this program 2 or 3 weeks ago. After Hillary finished writing this book and it went to press, all of a sudden the White House talking points emerged that the administration had concealed. And whereas the CIA talking points never mentioned a movie, never mentioned a video, never mentioned anything other than a terrorist attack, calling it an extremist attack, the White House talking memo that only was unearthed 2 or 3 weeks ago by Judicial Watch in a Freedom of Information suit says stress the movie so that people don't focus on policy shortcomings of this administration. And that's what Susan Rice was working off. And Hillary's account is sort of one cover-up too late.
Well, Dick, we know that Hillary will face a lot of questions on everything that's going on involving her time at the State Department. But real quickly, before we go, I wanted to get your take on this Bo Bergdahl prisoner swap real quickly. The report is that the Afghan leader, Hamid Karzai, the outgoing, is livid over this. Now, the president right now is in Poland meeting with European leaders. How do you think the Europeans are reacting to this prisoner swap?
Well, I think that they're probably running for cover and very glad that they didn't do it. This is a political disaster for Obama, and it's only just beginning. When this guy gets home and he starts spewing out this propaganda, and we get to see up front that we have an Edward Snowden in our hands, not a prisoner of war, and when the military come out, more and more stories, there's indications now that the main reason that he was released or that they swapped was because Obama felt that he couldn't pull out of Afghanistan and still have him in custody. Obama's claim that we never leave soldiers behind is a ridiculous assertion. He wasn't captured on the battlefield. He wasn't left behind. He walked out of the compound and went around asking for someone who speaks English so that he could negotiate with the Taliban or give information to the Taliban. He was much closer to a deserter or even a turncoat and a spy than he was a prisoner of war. It's like calling Benedict Arnold a prisoner of war.
Now, Dick,
Wow.
as someone who's advised presidents before, this seems like a mistake or at least a misguided decision to do this prisoner swap. How would you, in a word, characterize this Bergdahl situation in terms of a foreign policy disaster for President Obama?
It's a horrible disaster, and it's sort of it's blinders. He was focused on one goal, which is get out of Afghanistan, and to do that, he had to get the prisoner back.
All right, well, he will definitely face...
That was the mindset, and that was the goal. And nobody stopped to ask, what are his views, and where's he coming from?
Well, definitely face a lot more criticism when he returns to the United States. A lot of folks give the president some space overseas. Doubt that'll happen when he returns home.
Dick Morris, as always, we thank you for your input. When we come back, will our troops face those freed Taliban folks on the battlefield? Pete Hoekstra is next here on America's Forum.